Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are, and welcome to Chattering with Nicholas Vince. And this week I'm chattering with Doug Bradley, who I will introduce in just a few moments after I've done a quick couple of shout-outs. Firstly, just to remind you all that myself and Doug will be at Spooky Empire, Orlando, Florida, next weekend, along with Barbie Wilde, Simon Bamford, and Imogen Borman, who is Tiffany in Hellbound. At the same weekend, The Night Whispered will be screening, and The Night Whispered is also going to be screening at Slash and Bash Horror Film Convention in Kansas City that weekend, as long as I manage to get the file across to them properly, which I hope to do tomorrow. But yeah, so that's all happening next weekend. So if you're either in Orlando, Florida, or you're in Kansas City, you have a chance to see The Night Whispered. And if you're at Spooky Empire, you can see a whole load of films that are screening that weekend. Anyway, good morning, Mr. Bradley. Good afternoon, Mr. Bradley.
Good afternoon, good evening. Afternoon here. Evening.
Afternoon there.
Yes.
Cool. And how are you?
I'm very well. Yourself?
Good. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Excited to be talking to you today. And I wanted to talk to you, first of all, actually, about a film which I think you're probably terribly associated with.
Terribly associated?
Terribly associated with, that was produced by Christopher Figg and stars...
Killer Tongue.
Which, if you look on IMDb, you cannot find Killer Tongue. You can't. No, you can only. It's
La lingua assassina. That's a shame.
Yeah, it's there. It's as done as La Lingua. Lingua
assassina.
Assassina. Yes, because it's yes. And I just keep on seeing trailers for it, and once you heard you describe the plot for it, so please, can you just tell us, people who may not have seen Killer Tongue, how you got involved with it? What is the plot?
Blimey. I think it was 1995, I think. And Chris Figg contacted me and said he wanted to send me a script, so I said okay, and I started reading this thing. And I had no idea what to make of it, other than I thought, I have a feeling I ought to do this. And then Chris contacted me again to say that Robert Englund had signed up to do it. And it was several weeks in the desert in Almeria in southern Spain, and a week or two in Madrid for interiors, and you get paid for this crap. So why not? I also had the feeling I can't let this one go by. If I try and outline, it's what is it, 21 years ago now. If I try and outline the initial plot, I play a convict on a work gang who's losing his hair. At that point, I had my widow's peak and the egg in the nest. Otherwise, I still had jet black hair. So this character was called Wig, and he had a little piece that just sat over his bald patch, and in fact, over his bunk in the work crew cabin, he had a framed collection of wigs as the bald patch had grown. So they started very small, and then they got bigger as they went along. So I'm a convict on the work crew, and Robert played the chief screw, the head of the work gang. Before the movie begins, oh Christ, I'm going to have to remember names, and I'm going to forget, and it'll be very embarrassing. Jason. No, it's gone.
Jonathan Rhys-Meyers? No.
No. We'll get to him. He was a bank robber, and he had pulled off a bank heist with his girlfriend, who's the main actress in the movie. I can see her face and her name. I wish I'd known you were going to do this to me.
I'm sorry, and it's probably Melinda Clark. Is it Melinda
Yes,
Clark?
yes, Mindy.
And Jason Durr is the Jason
Yes.
you're thinking of. Yes.
So they had pulled off a bank heist, which went wrong. So he was arrested, and he's now on our work gang. She still had the money, so she wanted to keep herself and the money close to him. So in order to do this, she had gone undercover as a nun, as you do, as a nun in a convent very close to where the work gang was situated, with one hitch, which was that she was extremely pregnant. So she's a very, very pregnant nun with this stash of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, who knows how much money. So that's the initial setup. Then you kind of cut to outer space, where this comet is heading towards Earth, and it starts to disintegrate and break up as it reaches the Earth's atmosphere. So bits of the comet are breaking off. We come back to Mindy in the convent, and for reasons I can't remember or even try to begin to explain to you, she is, as this very pregnant nun, the proud possessor of several large poodles.
Okay.
And she is sitting at dinner with the poodles, who are all sitting on chairs around the table, and they're eating bowls of soup. Now, I should explain also that on this same night, we convicts have staged a coup in the work camp, and we've hogtied Robert Englund and escaped into the desert. Myself and a black guy who was a Spanish boxer in real life, not in the movie. He was actually a Spanish boxer. So we're driving through the desert in a Jeep trying to get away from the people behind us. So the comet or meteor or asteroid, whatever it was, enters the Earth's atmosphere. Most of it breaks up, but there's one large piece of it that comes down and lands right in the middle of the desert. New Mexico was what Almeria was doubling for. Lands right in the middle of the desert. Now, one of the let's cut back to Mindy and the poodles having dinner. One of the bits of the comet, or several bits, fly through an open window, and bits of the comet land in the soup bowls of the poodles. The poodles proceed to eat their soup and are instantly transformed into drag queens.
So poodles transformed into drag queens.
Who were a wonderful, hilarious motley crew who had been auditioned and garnered from various clubs in Soho, so you can imagine. Meanwhile, myself and the Spanish boxer arrive at this lump of meteor that has landed in the desert, and there it is. So we get out of our Jeep and we approach it very cautiously, and it's sort of glowing as it sits there. This meteor has special powers in that as you approach it, it starts to send you into the throes of sexual ecstasy. And the closer you get, the better it gets. Unless you make the mistake that my companion made, which is to touch it, at which point you immediately explode, which he did. So I spent the entire movie covered in blood from head to foot after he exploded next to me. Meanwhile, the poodles, now drag queens, are all dancing in the desert. And at some point in this early part of the film, in Almeria, I went out of the hotel we were staying in, and I went into the bar next to the hotel to get a cerveza and something to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And I fell into conversation with a young American guy, clearly a young American guy, who introduced himself to me as an American tourist, and wanted to know about Almeria. And we chatted a bit, and I had my beer and had my tapas and said goodnight, went back to the hotel, arrive on set the following morning, and here is the American tourist on set. And that was my first meeting with Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, who's Irish.
Is he?
He spent, well, I believe he's of Irish extraction, certainly not American, but he passed himself off for the duration of our conversation, successfully enough to fool me. You know, some may say that's not too hard to do, but as an American tourist. It was only when I got on set the following day. And at that point, I mean, this is before Bend It Like Beckham and the rest of it. Now, I think it was his first movie.
I think it might well be, actually. Yeah. That kind of, yeah. But
strange boy. He had his testicles electrocuted by Robert Englund. There's not many people that can say that, I suspect. Anyway,
well,
that's a brief outline of
Killer Tongue. So
maybe the first 20 minutes of the movie. And Mindy also consumed a piece of asteroid in her soup, and she was transformed into the creature with the killer tongue.
Right.
I always have to explain to people when I tell them I was in a movie called Killer Tongue that it's not a porno movie. Although from the outline you may wonder. But
I've seen the trailers, and somebody was just saying that they did actually used to have a cassette of Killer Tongue.
Right.
A video cassette of Killer. I can't remember. I can't imagine it's ever been broadcast on UK TV. But
Alberto Sciamma wrote it and directed it.
Yes.
Lovely guy. And I don't know what became of him. He was planning to do. I remember him outlining the plot of his next two movies to me. I don't know whether they ever got made. One was about a man who was turning into a train, and the other was about a man who was having a sexual relationship with his sofa.
I'd like to see that. I'd like to see one of those movies. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thank you very much indeed for sharing. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about is this book which I'm rereading at the moment. Behind the Mask of a Horror Actor.
I've never read it.
I have read it. I said rereading. I did say.
I was asking you if it was any good because I've never read it.
Right. One of the reasons I wanted, because it says here on the, because I do some research for these things. I swear it said in here that it was based on, it's 20 years ago, October. Yeah. Sacred Monsters Behind the Mask of the Horror Actor, copyright 1996, Doug Bradley.
Good Lord. Yes, that was my original title for it, Sacred Monsters. Behind the Mask was the subtitle. I'm pretty impressed that it's survived in print for 20 years. No thanks to Titan Books, it has to be said. I hope they're not listening. But it had a bit of a checkered history. The thing is, when I had the initial discussions about it, everybody was sort of agreed, that it wasn't going to be troubling the bestseller lists necessarily, but it would have a long shelf life. Um, long story short, Titan, and I had said, I do the conventions, and it will sell at conventions, but I could never get Titan to be cooperative in getting books to conventions, which was extremely frustrating. And as far as I could tell, the book was never actually put in any bookshops anywhere. So achieving sales of the thing seemed to be a mysterious process. And they duly cancelled it, just out of the blue. And then a few years later, I got contacted again because Titan had changed their distributors in the US from Diamond to Random House Penguin, and Random House had gone through Titan's list, including their cancelled titles, and had asked why my book had been cancelled, and said they wanted to reprint it. So it found its way back into print, but they wanted to change the title to Behind the Mask of the Horror Actor, just so that it it does what it says on the tin, as it were. And since they took over distribution, everything is fantastic. As conventions approach, I send an email, and a box of books duly arrives at the hotel where I am, and or here, and it sells well on my website as well. So.
It's great, but so it came out of a lecture that you did originally, is that right?
Well, yeah, I was contacted by Scott Wolfman.
Actually, his name.
Actually, his name of Wolfman Enterprises. He was based in Connecticut, I think, somewhere in New England. And he had been arranging speaking engagements, I know, for Kane Hodder and a few other people, and he contacted me. So I put together this lecture, which was actually called The Man in the Mask, which was for college and university audiences principally here. And I tried to get it going in the UK. I actually hired somebody to contact colleges and universities all over the United Kingdom, and got one booking from Southampton University. One booking. And I went back there like 4 or 5 years in a row, I think. And when I started the lecture, I sort of thought, well, this needs to be an hour long. This is going to be a struggle. But in fact, the struggle was to condense everything into 1 hour, and it really was a struggle. And I wanted to start with the kind of cultural and historical background of masking, and the role of masking in the birth of the very birth of theatre and drama in Greek theatre and Japanese theatre, to bring us into masked roles and transformative roles in horror films. And I think also because we had used, as you know, we had used masking a lot in The Dog Company and the various pantomime theatre and theatre of the imagination and so forth, the variations of the theatre company with Clive, over the 10 years up to the breakup of the Dog Company in the early 80s. So I'd always been interested in that, and it had been very much a part of the work that we did over that period of time. So I kept on having to try and shoehorn all this stuff into an hour, and so I started to think, well, maybe this wants to be something bigger. So I took it to Katie at Titan, and she said straight away, yes, come in for a meeting. And David Barraclough, who was my editor, I had assumed I'd be writing something like a coffee book, lots of pictures and a few more words than I'd written for the lecture, but basically the lecture with pictures. And David said to me, "How long do you think it would take you to write 30,000 words?" And I don't know. What's 30,000 words? Is that the Bible, War and Peace, Moby Dick? I've no idea. I don't know what 30,000 words is. It's more words than I've written since my last university essay. So I set about doing it.
It's great. I mean, it's a fascinating book. I mean, one of the things I like about it is you've obviously did a huge amount of work. You really do start from the earliest cave paintings onwards.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it really is a very, very erudite. And then you talk about modern days and interviews with people like Gunnar Hansen, etc. But one of the questions I wanted to ask based on this is, do you have a favorite film or literary monster?
Wow. Well, there's a wall of them behind me, with Boris bang in the middle. I don't know how much detail people can see.
You can see that that's the Frankenstein creature.
This is my favorite ever. Actually, Gunnar sent this one to me because I'd seen the picture and I talked about it, and he found it as a poster. So if people can't see the detail, it's hang on a moment. We have the technology. How's my framing?
A little bit more to your left, I think.
That way, am I on the right picture?
Yeah, you're in the right. Unfortunately, you can see the reflection of me, but basically, at the moment, we think we're looking at Mr. Clive, possibly to the right-hand side, but we can see that this is the creature holding a cup of tea.
So it's the Bride of Frankenstein, which you can tell because he's got the scar on his forehead, and they built this chair for him. I'll come back over here now because I'm going to drop the laptop in a moment. That wouldn't be good. There are pictures of him on set on Frankenstein, and he's sort of draped over a collection of deck chairs, and it all looks highly uncomfortable and unsafe. They built the monster chair for him. It's not really a chair. He sort of leans back on it with the armrests, and he's enjoying a cigarette and a cup of tea. The elegant monster, which is a central idea. Yeah. Always the elegant monster, and one to relate it to Hellraiser, that Clive has always been obsessed with, and exactly what he was doing with Frank in Hellraiser. Mm-hmm. You know, I've said a lot that most horror directors, and certainly I think most directors in the 80s who would put a skinned man on screen would do it as a whoa, that's scary, and it's gone. Clive puts him on screen and he stays on screen. Mm. And he walks and he talks and he has emotions and he's in love and he drinks red wine and smokes cigarettes, you know. So this notion of the monstrous that has become elegant and cultured and civilized, and there he is. I think who you mistook as Robert Clive. There's a picture down here. This might be an easy way to do this. Of James Whale.
Oh, James Whale, yeah.
His makeup. With an oversized brush.
Has he got a cigarette as Karloff got a cigarette in his mouth?
He has got a cigarette in his mouth, yes. Yes, indeed. I think it was a slightly strained relationship between James Whale and Karloff. I think certainly by the time they got to Bride, I think Whale was a bit pissed off that Karloff was getting so much of the limelight. So he is certainly important as a monster to me. I think Who You Were Mistaking for Robert Clive is my god among horror actors. If you're asking me for my favorite horror actor, it's not even a discussion. It's Peter Cushing,
right?
The greatest of them all. And I've said a lot. For me, it's the way that he switches. His portrayal of Baron Frankenstein in the Hammer movies, I think, is one of the great essays in evil on screen. As the series goes on, he gets more. It's not just about getting nasty. He's amoral, more and more amoral, absolutely cold. And then he switches from that to that white hot intensity of his Van Helsing, and his ability to just flip between the two is astonishing. And he was also my favorite Sherlock Holmes BBC series in the 60s.
Yes. Yeah.
And one of my favorite Doctor Who's as well, from the two movies.
Yes, of course, because for those who don't know, he did he wasn't an alien. He was a professor, or
No, he was the Doctor in.
He was playing the Doctor, but he wasn't playing him as a time Lord. There was no explanation of that. That it's with Bird.
Like Invasion Earth, I think was it? There were two. I think.
Am I right in thinking that Bernard Cribbins was in the Hammer horror movie Invasion Earth, or Doctor Who and the Daleks? Yes, says Craig, and Bernard Cribbins ended up by being. Craig is my source of all things Whovian, and therefore ended up with Catherine Tate and David Tennant in the more recent TV versions of them.
Yes. And I just binge watched season 8. I mean, that's a nonsensical thing to call it. That's what Netflix knows it as. Peter Capaldi's first season, which I've only just caught up with.
All right. I kind of stopped after Matt Smith for some reason. I think because I didn't like the girl particularly. And Peter, nothing against Peter Capaldi, but
but he is. Well, I got slightly tired of recent Doctors since David Tennant,
right?
Who I liked very much.
Yeah.
But Capaldi's absolutely brilliant.
Well, he's going back to the original Patrick Troughton. In my mind, that was a journey back to the original Patrick Troughton.
Wait, Troughton is my. I mean, look, I'm old enough and ugly enough and stupid enough to be prepared to admit to having watched the very first episode of Doctor Who, 63, 62 or 63, I think.
Yeah. It was the same week.
And I have very strong memories of Hartnell.
Sorry, I'm saying Patrick Troughton, I mean Hartnell. I think Capaldi is going back to Hartnell rather than...
Patrick Troughton, I always cite as my favourite. He was the first mad Doctor.
Who played the flageolet. I was fascinated. I think I went and bought a flageolet just so I could learn the flageolet based on that. Yeah.
You, flageolet. Sounds like something you get up to in your basement at night.
Probably the inspiration of Hellraiser, come to think of it.
It's a penny whistle to most of you watching. But Hartnell was old and he was grumpy.
And
I like that. I like old and grumpy. And Capaldi's kind of a bit of a mixture of the both, with little elements of Dr. Spock about him, unemotional and unable to understand human emotions, which is interesting. I like what he's done a lot.
I'll have a look at the. Funnily enough, I was watching one
and of course, I don't know what your policy towards expletives is.
Please fire away. I'm assuming we're watched by adults.
Of course, he's, from people who know him. You'll have to remind me the title of the series.
Oh my goodness!
Playing Alistair Campbell.
Playing Alistair Campbell. Yes.
Craig will shout it off screen.
Craig. Peter Capaldi was in a series where he swore a lot that was called The Thick of It.
Yes, The Thick of It. Thank you, Craig. So, which, of course, he very famously said, fuckety fuck, fuck, fuck. Yes. So he was becoming the first Doctor to have ever said fuck on television, I think. And they referenced it in Doctor Who. I collapsed in hysterics because there was a point where he was getting flustered, and he said, "Shut up, shut up, shutity, shut up." But he's brilliant.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Okay. Well, as I expected, I've got a flood of questions. I apologize to anybody whose question I don't actually manage to.
I need to add one more bit.
Sure.
Question, because I just bought this. The godfather of them all.
That is gorgeous. That is absolutely gorgeous. Is Lon Chaney rather than Junior? Lon Chaney playing
Lon Chaney
Senior playing Phantom of the Opera.
Yes, this is Eric. Say hello to the ladies and gentlemen. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Would you like a bottle of beer? I'd love a bottle of beer. Right, you can go back over there now. So he is absolutely the godfather, because he designed, made, and applied every single one of his makeups. Anyway,
yes, I mean, basically known as the man of 1,000 faces, because he had a makeup kit that he used to carry around with him, so that he could, if they wanted a Mexican, he could make himself up as a Mexican. This is when he was started out, when he was proud, etc. And
yes, and he. Sorry, I'll bring him back over. This is really pretty well detailed. And if you look at his false teeth here, and go and look at him as Quasimodo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, it's the same set of teeth.
And is there not? I remember reading this in Dennis Gifford's Hamlin All-Colour Book of Horror. I suspect that he made his eyeball. He pulled his eyeballs forward by putting wire behind them.
Well, he does all kinds of mad things. So on this one, and again, they've caught the detail well here, because you can see the line of the bald cap across the forehead. So bald cap is on. This is his own wig, theatrical wig, presumably, because he started in vaudeville, and most of his makeup tricks are theatre tricks applied for the camera. He's basing how Eric looks precisely on the description in the original novel, which I doubt people even. I've certainly never read it.
I have. It was a long time ago. I'll tell you why. I know I've read it because it was part of the Dennis Wheatley library of horror.
Okay. Yeah. So he's trying to make himself look like a corpse. So he's put. This is all in my book. I think stuff that they call fish gut here to pull the tip of his nose back.
Yeah.
So it looks like he doesn't have a nose, like a skull, and he pushed cigar holders supposedly up his nose to keep his nostrils flared. The false teeth probably with wires in the corner of his mouth to keep everything pulled down, and glued his ears to the side of his head because, of course, skulls don't have ears. What you're talking about is the makeup for London After Midnight.
Ah, yes.
Where he's got the vampire teeth, but every single tooth, not just the canines, the tooth is sharpened to a point. And this strange thing going on with his eyes. And I tried to find a definitive version of it and couldn't, so I sort of outlined the various theories when I wrote about it in the book, which are just scary, that he's using large contact lenses back then to keep his eyes there, or that he had wires around here, or just that he was, again, using, I mean, this part of his eye on the London After Midnight makeup is permanently in this position. So whether he's just, again, used tape to pull everything down. And he didn't care what he was doing to himself. Everything was about the veracity of the character. The harness that he built for himself for Quasimodo, he didn't act having a hunchback. He built himself a harness with a series of straps so he could tighten one side and buckle it off. So he's permanently twisted. So he can't get upright, and then built this thing to sit on his back. Slightly mad, I think, but you can only doff your cap and kneel in reverence.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, well, the other thing I wanted to briefly talk about, folks, I'm aware that time is rapidly moving on. I did just want to mention some of these things, which are Doug's Spinechillers, which is I haven't listened to all of these particular ones, but I do remember when I was working, listening to them in the car. And they're just...
You posted a very early and very kind review to Amazon.
Indeed. Oh, they're brilliant. I mean, I'm always honest in my reviews. How did these are with Renegade, I believe? Yes, Renegade. How did the Spinechillers come about? And
I was had been working with Tony Luke, who sadly passed away at the beginning of this year, finally lost his battle with cancer, which had been going on for many, 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 many years. Tony first contacted me to do a thing called Archangel Thunderbird, which we did a pilot for the Sci-Fi Channel, which was pretty good, and we were working together on a bigger story and a larger script, and it went round and round in circles and didn't happen. And then we worked on Dominator, which was an animated movie built around the character of Dominator that Tony had created, who had appeared in, I think, 2000 AD. And Tony's work was always very, very heavily influenced by Japan and Japanese manga. And in fact, he sold Dominator back to Japan. I think I'm right in saying he was the first non-Japanese artist to have his work published in Japanese manga. And Danny Filth of Cradle of Filth provided the voice of Dominator. We had Mark and Lard, as they were then known, Mark Ratcliffe and the other Mark, both on Six Music now. They played two of the demons. Ingrid Pitt provided a voice for it. I did, and I kind of helped Tony produce it.
Right.
And we got that completed, and we were working on a sequel, which was running into money trouble. Surprise, surprise. And a guy that we had got to know called Alexander Finbow came along to offer us some help and become part of the process and bring some investment with him. So we created a new company called Renegade Arts Entertainment. And Alex wanted to get some other projects off the ground. Tony and I had always said we wanted to do some Lovecraft together. So the suggestion came up to do a short Lovecraft story with me narrating the story and Tony providing illustration and animation to go with it. And that was the first Spinechiller, The Outsider. I basically went home and thought, well, this is great. Now I have to sit down and plow my way through the entire works of H.P. Lovecraft to find the right story. The first story I read was The Outsider. And I thought, well, I don't need to go any further because this is, not only is the story perfect, but it's about 17 minutes long, which is exactly right. So that was it. And so I was filmed in front of green screen and then taken as an element and mixed with illustration and animation. And we completed that. And that's still available. And we wanted to start work on the second one, which would be The Telltale Heart, which we did complete, but was beset by awful technical problems. And Tony was extremely ill during that period as well. So it's sort of in existence, but it's become the longest running short film in history. it's about 8 years in the making at this point, and it's not much longer by minute. But maybe one fine day we'll get it out there. But in the meantime, Alex said to me, these are great, but they take quite a lot of time, and time is money. Maybe we should do some straightforward audiobooks. So the idea had also first come into my head when I was doing the audiobook of Clive's Mr. Begone, because I was sort of thinking about what Tony was doing with Dominator, and that the audiobook hadn't really moved forward from the days of the C60 cassette. So that was the idea, to kind of mix the narration and images. Jackanory for grown-ups was the shorthand we used for the first. Nobody in America now knows what we're talking about.
No, not this latest, and I'm not going to tell them.
It takes us back to Bernard Cribbin as well. But,
oh God, yeah, it does. Yeah.
Mainstay of Jackanory. And to Edgar Allan Poe as well, because Bernard Cribbins read the story of, oh God, what was her name? The little girl who had a pet raven, who was called. Oh God, he had.
Is this a Roald Dahl?
No, it's not. It isn't Roald Dahl. But of course, the raven only ever said one thing, which was nevermore. But I digress. Where am I trying to get to? Yes. So he said maybe we should just do some straightforward audiobooks. So we did.
Right.
And we had to restrict it to authors who were in the public domain, because we couldn't afford. I think the only story we paid for was Arthur Machen.
Okay.
The Bowman of Mons, if that's I'm not even sure that's the right title. But that was the only one we paid for, because he is in public domain.
Right.
So it was very heavily Lovecraft and Poe and Ambrose Bierce, of whom I was entirely ignorant before we started doing Spinechillers. And I am such a fan of his work now.
Because Ambrose Bierce wrote The Devil's Dictionary.
Yes, he did.
Yes.
Yes. He described the novel as a short story padded.
If you've never come across Devil's Dictionary, do look it up. It's got some wonderful definitions in there.
I think certainly in America, people will be very familiar with an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, which is a Civil War story. It's very well known in America, which in fact Robert Englund read for us. Robert and Jeffrey Combs did some guest readings.
Yes, I think, funnily enough, on the two, yes, that I think is one of the ones.
And we're not
both of their names.
We're not quite finished with it yet. I mean, 13 volumes are done and out as a box set. But we will. I've been setting up to do some recording here at home, and I'm at the moment in the early stages of recording for Clive again. He's bringing out a collection of short pieces. The collection is called Tonight Again.
Oh wow!
And they're very short. Well, some of them are. There's one story which is longer, but there's some very moving, beautiful short poetry. It's rather rude. It's a bit rude, Nicholas. You can't read it to your children.
Or the dog, in my case.
To myself as a children's story with pornography. There's a lot of penises. Shocked to hear.
Yeah, completely surprised by that. Would not expect that at all from Clive. No.
And one or two vaginas around as well, and a few breasts, but a lot of penises. So I'm in the early stages of recording that by invitation. So when that's done, what we want to do is complete the author collections for Spinechillers. So there are some stories that simply didn't get recorded. Poe is almost complete. There aren't very many of his that we missed out.
Right.
A couple. There's one or two, like I think it's the Gold Bug, that we won't be recording. It's difficult because there's a black character in it, and Poe's written in black lingo.
Right.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
And I couldn't bring myself to do it.
Right.
It's an issue. It's an issue actually doing the Rats in the Walls, the Lovecraft story. In the Rats in the Walls, the narrator owns a black cat who is called, I'll use the word once here, is called Niggerman, which was the name of Lovecraft's own cat. And I think we're all fairly familiar with Lovecraft's questionable attitudes to foreigners and people of dark skin, shall we say. Now, if you buy the book, it's there, it's printed, and we had this debate, went round and round and round between us, because and I couldn't make up my mind as to whether I should be reading it as written. I think when it's on the page, it's different, because you can jump over it. When you're reading it, it becomes a thing, and the cat is not a central character to the story at all, but it's there all the time. And in the end, we decided we didn't want to draw attention to it. So we just referred to my cat, or my black cat. I'm still slightly uneasy with having done it, because I don't approve of censoring or changing people's works to choose our sensibilities, to suit our sensibilities. They did it to Shakespeare, and it's called Bowdlerizing.
Yes.
Yeah,
but I mean, that was done in what, the 19th century, Bowdlerization?
Was it 18th or 19th? I can't.
18th. I try to think if it was early 1800s or 1700s. It could be as early as 1700s. It's interesting that there's a radio channel over here, Radio 4 Extra, where they redo comedy shows from the 1970s, and often you will find them putting up an apology beforehand,
right,
saying the humor is very much of its time. And you just listen to it, you go, and the point you're making about the fact that it's, when you're listening to it, because it's people reading, you can't skip over it, and you can't.
Yes.
It does make it's incredibly powerful and difficult thing to do. Cool. All right. So we have had.
I think there's the Never Bet the Devil You Had and Berenice, and Murders in the Rue Morgue, which pardon me, I think that was an email alert from me. It's Walmart. Thank you, Walmart. I don't shop at Walmart. I completely lost my thread now.
Well, we were talking about. I was actually going to try move us on because we're running out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, so there'll be more Spinechillers stories,
which is going to be my last question.
There's a lot of love. Well, Murders in the Rue Morgue we might do as a two-hander.
Right.
Myself and Jeff Combs. He would play the narrator, possibly as Poe.
Right.
And I would see Auguste Dupin, because of course Poe is basically doing Sherlock Holmes 50 years ahead of his time. He's inventing the detective story.
Yeah,
already invented the horror story.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of Lovecraft and plenty more beers. And anyway, carry on.
Yeah, I was going to see if I had my Edgar Allan Poe. Yeah, because the moment you start talking about the, I've got an Arthur Rackham illustrated version of the Tales of Mystery and Imagination. It's just brilliant. Okay, right. We have had a lot of questions in. I think we will run over our hour a bit, if that's all right with you.
I'm fine. I've talked too much, so yes.
Well, it's fine. And some of them, we will not get to all of these, folks. I do apologize. But there's some actually, this is one I find very interesting. This is from C.L. Pike. Doug, Nick, what are the key elements of a horror script that will engage you as an actor to sign on to a project? So what are the key elements of a horror script that will engage you as an actor to sign on to a project?
Hi, CL. That's very formal of you. CL. Story. Imagination. Interesting characters. Well written. I sort of have a rule that if there's a spelling mistake on the first page, it's wah, wah.
Your heart just sinks, doesn't it? Because you think, sorry, folks, this is the days of spell correct, autocorrect.
Yes, I mean it. Story is first and foremost. If the story is interesting, you're over the first hurdle.
Yeah.
But that's, I think, the first thing I look for. And then, of course, as an actor, you're supposed to look to see how early on in the script you appear, and if you should be in the first 5 pages, and then you should go, not read anything else. You should just go to the end of the script. And if you're still alive on the last page, you say yes. That's not the serious answer, though. It's
an understandable answer. Okay, so we will come on to some Hellraiser questions in a few moments, but there is one thing. Vicky Lowe asked, what was it like doing guest vocal work with Cradle of Filth, who you mentioned earlier on? And are there any bands you would like to do guest vocal work with in the future?
Hi, Vicky. It was great. I'm a major disappointment to my fans because I'm not a fan of heavy metal. But I sort of already knew Danny. I'd met him a few times. I'd mentioned that he provided the voice of Dominator, and I was there when we did the recording session. And I like Danny. I think he's a funny guy. What's hilarious is he's tiny, and how this voice erupts out of that frame is rather beyond me. Basically, I got a phone call from Faye Wolven. The wolves are becoming a theme in this. Danny was wondering if you would be interested in doing. We don't have very much money, and she was right. She didn't, but I said yes. That was Midian, which was sort of Danny's homage to Nightbreed. So I said yes, and he then was living in Battle in Sussex. So I drove down and spent an afternoon doing the recording. It wasn't a great deal of stuff, and I learned a new respect for them because there were a couple of pieces that I had to do to the music. Most of it I just recorded dry, but some of it I had to do to a backing track, which was difficult. I'm looking for the onbeat and the offbeat here, and in these 1925 time signatures that they work in, there's no such thing. So I sort of came out pleading with them to do something in 4/4 if they wanted me to. So that was Midian, and then a year later, I get a call from Faye. Danny was wondering if, and so I did 4 albums with him in the end. Nymphetamine, Thornography, and Godspeed on the Devil's Thunder was the last thing I did. I always had a lot of fun with them. If there was one band in that corner of the musical world that I would jump through hoops of fire and fight off rabid dogs and fearsome dragons to get to work with, it would be Ghost.
Yes.
Of whom I am a massive fan. Just saw them again for the 4th time here in Pittsburgh, and so absolutely delighted that Pope Star, the EP, has gone to #1 on Billboard, which is an extraordinary achievement, and so delighted for them. All the Nameless Ghouls, who I am not allowed to name, are wonderful. Papa is a great guy. Got to know him well now. So yes, they would be.
I know they're extraordinary. I keep on seeing their photographs come up on my time. I met them very briefly, when they're in costume. I have no idea what they look like out of costume.
Right. Yes. I'd seen the image. I mean, it's my own prejudices against heavy metal. I'd seen what they looked like, and I'd written them off. I thought, oh, I know what you sound like. You sound like that, which I can't abide. And then, well, I was in Dallas, Texas Frightmare, and Bill Philpott. They were playing in Dallas, and they came to the convention, and we went to see them. And I sat there thinking, oh my God, this is like, I've typified it as if ABBA did Satanism. That's very unfair to them. But they do music, and oh my God, he can sing. And they did a cover of Here Comes the Sun.
Oh, wow.
which was fairly amazing. And on the EP, the Popestar EP, only one song is an original Ghost song. They've always done quite a few covers. I think they've done an ABBA cover. I'm pretty certain I'm right in saying that. They always covered Rocky Erickson's "If You Have Ghosts," which they always used to play live. I think they've dropped it now. But Square Hammer is the original song, but they do a cover of the Eurythmics' "Missionary Man," and Echo and the Bunnymen, "Nocturnal Me," and two that I didn't know. One by a electronic music duo called Simian Mobile Disco, and the other one is a Swedish rock band from the 80s, and I can't even remember their name. But the Simian Mobile Disco, I actually asked Papa, how on earth did you come across that to cover that? Soundtrack of FIFA is the answer, which is fantastic. So they're just a wonderful band, and live they're such an experience. I mean, I'd go again tomorrow night if they were within driving.
Wow. I met them very briefly when they come to see you guys, and they were in a complete costume and makeup. I just thought that the look is absolutely extraordinary. But I really want to go out and listen to them do "Here Comes the Sun" now. That sounds wonderful. Okay.
They don't do that anymore.
Oh, okay. Might be recorded somewhere.
Somewhere online. Yes.
Yeah. I will follow them online. I will find them online. Okay. I got to do a few questions that have come in. Oh, by the way, C. Alpine is Cinder, spelt Cynda. Hi, Cinder. Thank you. That was a great question. That was a really interesting. That was a really, really great question. Might you be doing any appearances in the UK soon? Have you got any planned?
Not at the moment.
Right.
I did this year. I was at the
Horror
Sheffield.
Yes.
Yeah, at the beginning
of months ago.
It's not impossible that I might be back next year, but nothing definite at the moment.
Okay. Oh, okay. That's a very interesting one that just come in from Don Pettit. Doug and Nick, do you have a favorite soundtrack or score that you would hold close to you as a favorite? Speaking of music.
Can I be incestuous and say Hellbound?
Yeah. That was immediately the one I thought of as well.
There's a lot. There's a lot. I mean, I love soundtracks, but I've always said that Chris Young's score is 50% at least of the power of the first film, and I think everybody knows that. That there's this thing that Clive was going to use Coil, which was the kind of 80s synth sound, and I've heard that music and it's fine, but it would have absolutely dated the film. Chris's score is one of the best horror scores ever written, and it's been ripped off so many times since. I hear it all over the place. And then the Hellbound, he actually slightly bettered himself. And he's such a wonderful guy, as you know, and he turns up at the conventions. He's as mad as a hatter, in a very, very good way. And I get a great kick out of it because he rushes up to the table. "Hey, Doug, how are you, guy?" Oh, and he's all, enthusiasm, excitement, bouncing up and down, and he leaves. And fans at my table are standing there in utter bemusement, and I say to them, "You have no idea who that was, do you? No idea, do you?" And they go, "No, it was Christopher Young, who wrote the score for Hellraiser." what? Oh my God! Quick, let's get his autograph.
He's a great. I think we've only ever once done a panel with him. Well, I've only ever once done a panel with us, and I think we were talking about. I believe. Did you not used to use his music to help you get into character?
Yes, when having finished the makeup process as the costume was going on, we used to throw the CD. Always Hellbound, throw the CD on the CD player in the makeup trailer. But I mean, music and horror films are, inextricable, aren't they? I mean, what's Psycho without that?
Yeah.
What's Halloween without that theme? So Rob Zombie couldn't contemplate doing his remake without using John Carpenter's original theme, and the thousands of examples, and outside horror as well.
No, it's very interesting, and the fact that you can take Mary Poppins and put it to a horror theme and make it terrifying. If you've ever seen it on YouTube, there is a beautiful where basically they've cut Mary Poppins as if it's a horror movie, as if it's the trailer for a horror movie, and it is really scary.
Was cut to Dark Side of the Moon. Was it?
I haven't seen that. No,
Mary
Poppins as a horror movie.
As a horror movie.
Literally taking the Walt Disney version and cutting it as if it's a trailer for a horror movie, and it is actually very scary. And again, it's to do with the music. It is the way that you edit it together and you do the music. Okay, so actually there is one moment, just very briefly, without wanting, because I do want to share a couple of things I was sent through earlier on today, and just go quick, because of course it is now 30 years since they started principal photography.
Do you know dates?
I do. I put them up on. I got them from Phil and Sarah Stokes, who are Clive Barker's archivists.
Well, if I never argue with them, they know everything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in fact, I've got
than I do.
They've got. Although I got from Stuart Conran the call sheet, which I think is probably from the first day of our filming. And I know it's a very early call sheet because I'm referred. You've got lead Cenobite and Butterball and female Cenobite, and I'm referred to as poor bastard. But actually,
I've been calling you that ever since.
Quite understandably. I just want to quickly share this again. This came from Phil and Sarah. Let's present this to everybody. This is us. I believe this is the makeup test. Looking at that background, I'm pretty certain that's a
yes. It could be. I could tell you definitely if I could see me a bit closer, because
I'm not sure if we can. If
there's a few.
Is that working for you? Is that expanding for you?
No.
No. Okay. Yeah. I don't think
I think you might. Well, the ways I would know, because there's a few shots of Pinhead from the makeup test that doing the rounds. One of which is on the back of one of the DVD boxes, and you can tell it two ways. One, I actually had pins for the makeup test, which were fine as long as the camera was close to me.
Yeah.
But when the camera went any distance away, I couldn't read them. So I just pulled. It
is the makeup. I know it's the makeup. I've just been able to expand it on my screen. I know that's the makeup test because I've got pointed teeth.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the other way you'll know with me is that I have blue eyes. So those are the decisions Clive made about the Pinhead makeup, that the pins needed to be more like nails so they would read from a distance, and black contact lenses to wipe out my baby blues.
That's interesting. I knew you and seen you with the contact. I hadn't realized that was a late decision. Okay, and the other one I got from Phil and Sarah, they say, incidentally, they are going to be doing a book next year with a whole load of stuff, unseen stuff. And this, we believe, this must be during shooting, because we're up in, well, you and Grace are in the torture, what is known as the torture room.
Yes.
Present that to everybody, and that's Robin.
Yes, that is Robin Vidgen, director of photography, looming over Grace's shoulder.
Yeah, I can't tell who it is at the edge of the screen.
I don't recognize that nose. No. Can't. It's hard to tell.
Yeah.
There's part of a body there as well, is there? Is there?
It looks to me as it's got the torture chamber. It's got the torture pillar on one of the torture pillars of the background there.
Okay.
So I'm assuming this must be probably early on in filming, I would imagine. One of the early shoot days for us, which didn't occur.
It looks like the set on. I know this because I know it was my first line in the movie. My first line in movie was, "We want the man who did this," and that looks like that set.
Yes, I think you're right. I remember you rehearsing that outside next to a duck pond.
Cricklewood Production Village.
Cricklewood Production Village, yes, and those wonderful ducks who disappeared.
During filming?
During filming, yeah, we reckon I think they lasted a week, didn't they? That there was a duck pond basically outside the studio, and the rumor was that basically
in John Gregson's oven, I would think.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah. Cool. All right. Okay. So, folks, we're rapidly coming to the end of the time now. Just wanted to say, quick question about this is from Danny Stewart. Doug, was Guillermo del Toro offered a chance to do Hellraiser Bloodline? Do you know?
I had no idea. I've never heard that before.
Right.
Wow. Oh my God. Really? I wish you hadn't told me that. I worship and adore Guillermo. All things Guillermo. I've never heard that before. I would love to know where that he would be a young Guillermo then. Bloodline was 12 years ago, 2004.
Right.
I don't know. I've never heard that.
Never heard on. Okay.
I didn't know until I met him when we did Hellworld, the 8th Hellraiser movie. I'm working with Lance Henriksen, that he was in the running to play Frank.
Really?
Yes.
Rather than Andrew Robinson. Okay.
No, because I'm confused by this. Because of course Andy was Larry, who and Sean was Frank.
It was Frank, yes.
But as Hellraiser was originally written, was Frank always intended to be American? I guess he would be, would he? He'd have to be, because he's Larry's brother. Right?
Well, you see, this is
because Lance couldn't have played Larry. He's not wholesome enough. So it would have to be Franco. So he told me that anyway. Oh,
interesting. Okay, yeah. Well, the reason I'm suddenly looking around that somebody at the last, when we were at Days of the Dead, they asked me to sign the front cover of a script, and it was not the shooting script, but I think it must have been a very early version of the script, because the character names were the ones from the short story.
Oh, Rory.
Yes.
Okay.
So that must have been a very early version of the script. And very kindly gave me the I don't know how early it is, because it doesn't have the front cover with the date on it. But it did when we were writing all over it. But yeah, so okay, well, I'm sure Lance knows what he's talking about, but strange, because unless Lance was in the UK, because I mean that's okay,
I
all
asked
right,
him yeah. So anyway,
okay, all right, okay. So I think this will probably be the last question, folks. Okay, so have any of the movies that you have appeared in or have you watched inspired you to have nightmares?
not for a long time. I mean, I used to have trouble sleeping as a kid after watching things, TV more than movies, I suppose. I've never dreamt about Pinhead. I think I'm pretty good at leaving the work in the office. So as far as anything I've done as an actor, I don't get moved to nightmares by horror films anymore. But I would have I can't particularly name specifics, but things would make it very difficult for me to sleep. Once I was asleep, I was kind of okay. Usually involved the lights being on. Ghosts were an issue for me when I was a boy. Couldn't get enough of them, and they scared me shitless. And
Interesting. I mean, my answer is, and I may have said this before. Basically, as long as I get to the end of the movie, I'm okay.
Huh.
Because and the one, it's Diary of a Madman starring Vincent Price.
Okay.
Which is online, and it was shown at 1 o'clock in the morning. And the reason I think I didn't get to the end was not because it was particularly scary, but because it was just so late at night. And my parents were all away, and I was in the house by myself. And it's the thing of going to bed. If you haven't finished the film, then I go and dream the rest of the film. I would have to have an ending of some sort, so I would dream the rest of a movie, something, which would probably involve me being part of it. It's all right. I've got a dog that's just joined me. Any strange noises outside off camera because a dog has just walked in the room.
Okay. Well, there's a dog just off camera over here as well. So.
Ziggy, you have a very gorgeous Ziggy. Cool. All right. So, I mean, okay. So, I'm seeing you next weekend. Funnily enough.
Yes. In fact, as soon as we've done this, I'm going to FedEx to send my stuff on its way down to Orlando.
Oh, right. What else have you got? Other appearances coming up for the rest of the year? What else?
I think Orlando will pretty much be it as far as conventions are concerned. If anyone is listening in the wider Pittsburgh area, the Saturday following Orlando, the 15th of October, at the Hollywood Theatre in Dormont, here in Pittsburgh, which is a wonderful single screen independent cinema that's been there for 90 years now, I believe. I will be introducing The Innocents. They have a kind of Halloween party every year, and they asked me to pick a movie to introduce. So I've chosen The Innocents, which was a movie that scared me a lot.
And I know you recently did a podcast, Movie Mayhem.
Yes, he'd asked me to pick a movie, and so because it's in my head at the moment, and I'm thinking about it, I threw that one at him. Right. Deborah Carr, Michael Redgrave, based on The Turn of the Screw, with a screenplay by Truman Capote. It was wonderful that it scared me as a child, and it bothered me because there's a ghost that leaves a real tear on a slate in the schoolroom, and this really bothered me because I knew ghosts. You put your hand through them and they walk through walls. Yeah. They're not real. They don't cry real tears, and this was very bothersome to me. And then they brought out a beautiful new version of it several years ago, and I went to the NFT to see the screening of it and was delighted to see that it holds up so well. It's gorgeously shot by Freddie Francis,
Mm-hmm.
Who went on to direct for Hammer and Amicus. Directed Dracula Has Risen from the Grave, which I think is my favorite of the Hammer Draculas, the second in the series. And then he went back to cinematography, and amongst other things, he shot The Elephant Man for David Lynch. Music by Georges Auric, who worked with Jean Cocteau on La Belle et la Bête and Orphée. He did the score for Cocteau's movies. So it's a wonderful kind of pool of talent in there, and the kids. Worrying children.
But it was the gardener. It was the Ghost of the Gardener that got me, and I'm trying to think of the name of the actor who played it.
Through the French windows.
Yes.
After Miles recites the poem.
Yeah.
And he's staring through the... What are you staring at, Miles? What are you staring at, Miles? There's nothing there, Miles. Yes, there is. And such an ambiguous ending. You don't know whether this is all in Deborah Carr's head, or whether she's... I don't want to give spoilers.
No, but and funny, I also saw it at the NFT when and had to go out and see it, and would love to see it again, having had this conversation again. But you're talking about Michael Redgrave, that is the way to open a movie.
Well, it's such a bizarre scene because it's just it should be just a straightforward job interview.
Yeah.
This is what you're required to. So it just sets the scene.
Yeah.
You're required to be, and it's not Michael Redgrave's children, is it? He's the uncle.
He's the uncle, and he no spoilers. He has no interest.
And we never find out what happened to the parents. We never know this. He doesn't want to know about the children. Wants no contact with them. Doesn't want to hear about them. He just wants to know they're being looked after.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want them to interfere with his social life. And he's a single man, and he's living in London, and that's the only thing that's said. And you read all kinds of terrible things into that. And that's backed up by the way in which this straightforward job interview becomes this quite elaborate flirtation between Michael Redgrave and Deborah Carr, in which she is a more than willing participant.
Yes.
And it sets the table in the way that, for example, Hitchcock does so brilliantly at the beginning of Psycho. He cuts the moral legs off from underneath Janet Leigh's character before we get into the film.
Yeah.
So she can't be the spotless heroine. We know she's in murky water before we get into the main story. And the same thing happens with The Innocents, that she's already set up as this person with this, and she's had a very sheltered background, we gather from what she tells Michael Redgrave in that scene. But she's engaging in this flirtatious dance with him, and it's very odd, and sets the tone for the whole film.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, absolutely extraordinary movie, and it's just a masterclass in storytelling. Is what we were talking about earlier. And it's the story, it's the character, it's the script. Apart from anything else. This has been asked by a number of people. Have you got anything lined up in terms of acting on the horizon?
Not immediately. I just earlier this year, I think it's out now. I did a voice for an animated film, Howard Phillips' Lovecraft and the Frozen Kingdom, which also has Christopher Plummer, Back to the Sound of Music, and Ron Perlman in the cast as well. So it's sort of Lovecraft as a boy. So it's a relationship between Lovecraft and his father. But so it's kind of an all ages animated Lovecraft movie. But decent script, I think. I haven't seen the film. I did that, and I've also done the sequel.
Oh, okay. And this is Howard Lovecraft and the Frozen Kingdom.
Yes.
So that
and Howard Phillips Lovecraft and the Underwater Kingdom is the sequel, which I've already recorded. And there will be a third one. I'm told. I said yes at the beginning of the year to a science fiction movie called The Dead Quiet. You know, and so you say yes, and a theoretical deal was agreed, and we wait. We wait.
Yeah, I've got a few of those.
And I've heard from them again a couple of times during the year via my agents, and you know, so maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't.
Yeah.
I seem to have spent quite a lot of this year saying no to movies.
Interesting.
Notably, Hellraiser Judgment, of course.
Yes. And that's another story for another time, because
and Dead House as well, which I said no to.
Right.
Death House.
And a
couple of other scripts which goes back to the question about, you know, what do you go for in a script. I'm not a fan of torture porn, never have been. You know, it doesn't entice me in, or else it's, you know, it's what we British actors know as a cough and a spit. Often a cough with barely time to muster a spit to go with.
And you just, I remember I turned one of those down. It's like, I know you're going to film it, and it's very nice of you to ask me. It's going to hit the cutting room floor the moment you start editing this movie.
Well, yes. So, you know, there's where we're at.
But we've got lots of Spinechillers to look forward to. We've got the film I'm just going to give you the check. Howard Lovecraft and the Frozen Kingdom, coming out soon, you think?
I think it already is.
Oh, cool.
I think, I'm not absolutely certain.
I think it's out by, funnily enough, its release date is the 3rd of October.
That's tomorrow.
According to IMDb, its release date is the 3rd of October.
Okay.
So
I'm playing Nyarlathotep.
I'm so glad, because I looked at that name and I wasn't going to give it.
one of Lovecraft's elder gods.
Ah, right. Okay. Oh, cool. All right. Well, I should look forward to that. Doug, thank you so much indeed for joining me.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure, as always. I will see you next weekend. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much indeed for joining us. I'm sorry, as usual, I didn't get to all your questions. I hope I got a fairly good representation of the similar things that people are asking. I'm with Doug next weekend. The following weekend, Fabio Frizzi, the composer of Lucio Fulci movies, is going to be with me. Just to remind you that, because English is not his first language, he's asked for questions beforehand. So if you do have a question for Fabio Frizzi, please have a look on Facebook. There's a link to a survey where you can log the questions, which I will be putting to Fabio. So hopefully see you in a couple of weeks time when I'm here. In the meantime, this has been Chattering with Nicholas Vince. I have been chattering with Doug Bradley. I'd like to say goodbye, Doug.
I will, and thanks to everybody for sending in questions, and have a safe flight across the pond, and I'll see you in Orlando on Thursday.
Brilliant. Take care, Sunshine. And Sunshine? Called Doug Bradley. Sunshine.
Sunshine. All right, Sunshine.
I'm going to try and top that for a way of leaving.